The snow was falling hard in the Alaskan wilderness, blanketing everything in silence. Deep in the forest, miles away from civilization, Daniel trudged forward, his breath forming icy clouds in the air. His parka was soaked, and his boots were nearly frozen, but he didn't stop. Not after what he'd seen. Just an hour earlier, he was in his cabin, preparing a pot of stew, when he heard the sound. A deep, guttural growl, followed by something else. A cry. It wasn't human. It wasn't wolf either. He knew the woods too well for that. He grabbed his rifle and flashlight, thinking maybe an animal was injured. But he wasn't ready for what he'd find. Following the sound, he discovered a mother bear, massive, bleeding, and in pain, dragging herself through the snow. She collapsed just 20 feet from him, her huge body shivering, her eyes wide with fear. At first, he thought she was dying, but then he saw it. Blood on her hind legs. She was in labor. Daniel had grown up with stories of animals giving birth, but no one ever imagined helping a bear deliver her cubs. The idea was insane, suicidal even, but he couldn't turn away. Not when she looked at him like that. Like she knew. Like she was asking. He placed his rifle on the ground slowly, making no sudden movements. The bear growled low, but didn't attack. Her body trembled. He could see the cub's head crowning. Instinct took over. He removed his gloves, his fingers already going numb, and carefully moved closer. The process was brutal. The bear writhed in pain, her teeth clenched, her paws thrashing in the snow. Daniel stayed low, speaking gently even though he knew she couldn't understand. He guided the cub out with his bare hands, feeling the slick warmth against the bitter cold. Minutes felt like hours. But finally, the cub was free. It wasn't moving. Daniel froze. His heart raced. He held the tiny creature, rubbed its back, breathed warm air on its nose. For a terrifying moment, everything stood still. Then a twitch. A gasp. A squeaky, desperate cry. The cub was alive. He gently placed it near the mother's belly. She nudged it with her nose, letting out a soft growl that sounded almost like a thank you. Daniel smiled. He couldn't believe what he'd just done. But then the growl returned. Louder. Angrier. It wasn't the mother bear. From the tree line, something emerged. Another bear. But this one was different, leaner, scarred, its eyes wild with rage. A male. And it wasn't here to welcome the newborn. Daniel's blood ran cold. He knew male bears killed cubs that weren't theirs. He also knew he was unarmed. The mother bear tried to stand but collapsed. She was too weak. The male bear came closer, teeth bared, growling deep and low. Daniel had seconds to react. He grabbed a fallen branch and lit the end with his lighter. The flame sputtered, barely alive, but it was enough to make the male hesitate. Daniel screamed, waving the fire, placing himself between the cub and death. The male bear roared. The cub squealed. Then the attack came. The male lunged, swiping with claws that could tear through bone. Daniel ducked, rolling through the snow. The branch flew from his hands. He reached for his rifle, but it was too far. The bear charged again. Suddenly, with a terrifying growl, the mother bear surged up and slammed into the male. The two titans collided like mountains, fur and blood flying through the air. Daniel grabbed the rifle and backed away slowly, his eyes locked on the violent struggle. The fight didn't last long. The mother was wounded. She fought bravely, but the male overpowered her, slamming her to the ground. Daniel screamed and fired a warning shot into the sky. The crack echoed through the trees. The male bear paused, breathing heavily, blood dripping from its jaw. It looked at Daniel again, eyes glowing with hatred. Another step, and Daniel would have to shoot. But then something unexpected happened. The cub crawled toward its mother, crying, and the male stopped. It looked down at the tiny creature, snorted, and turned away. With one last growl, it vanished into the trees. Daniel rushed to the mother. She was still alive, but barely. Her breath was shallow. Blood stained the snow around her. He didn't know what to do, and that's when he heard it. A voice. Faint. Distant. Daniel. He spun around, stunned. There was no one. He looked again. Nothing but trees. But he knew he heard it. Then the voice again. Clearer. Daniel. It was coming from deeper in the forest. He glanced back at the bear. She was breathing. The cub nestled beside her. Safe for now. Daniel grabbed his rifle and flashlight and followed the voice. The deeper he went, the colder it got. The snow turned to ice. The trees grew closer together. The air felt heavier. But the voice guided him. He stepped into a clearing and stopped. There was something in the center. A stone arch, ancient and covered in moss. It didn't belong here. It didn't make sense. It looked man-made, but old. Too old. The voice was gone. He approached the arch. The snow didn't fall within it. The wind didn't blow. It was silent. Still. He reached out. And the world twisted. For a second, everything vanished. No snow. No cold. Just darkness. Then light. Daniel found himself standing in a different forest. Same trees, but no snow. No winter. It was a spring. The air was warm. Birds chirped. Flowers bloomed. He turned around. The arch was still there. But it was crumbling, fading. He took a step forward and heard something that froze his heart. A growl. But not from a bear. Something else. He turned slowly. In the shadows, between the trees, two eyes glowed. Bright yellow. Too high off the ground for a wolf. Too wide for a bear. And they didn't blink. Then the creature stepped forward. It was like nothing he'd ever seen. A mixture of bear, wolf, and something reptilian. Long limbs. Scaly hide. Clawed feet. Its breath steamed in the warm air. And it was watching him. Daniel raised his rifle. It didn't matter. He knew it wouldn't help. The creature stepped closer. 1 step. 2. Then it stopped. Sniffed the air. Its eyes narrowed. And it spoke. You touched her. Daniel couldn't move. You helped her. The voice wasn't from its mouth. It was inside his head. Why? Daniel's voice trembled. She needed help. The creature tilted its head. You are not like the others. Daniel didn't answer. You crossed. Few do. Fewer survive. The creature stepped back into the shadows. Its voice echoed one last time. Protect the cub. Then it was gone. Daniel stood there, shaking. The warmth faded. The flowers wilted. The snow returned. He was back. Back in the cold. Back in the clearing. The arch was gone. He ran. Back to the mother bear. But something had changed. The cub was gone. And beside the mother, paw prints. Too large. Not from a bear. She looked at him, weak but calm. He searched the area. No blood. No drag marks. Just the prints, leading deeper into the forest. He wanted to follow. But something told him not to. Not yet. Instead, he returned to the cabin, confused, terrified, and full of questions. That night, he couldn't sleep. In the morning, the prints were gone. The mother bear had passed. But something strange happened. Weeks later, Daniel began finding signs around the forest. Carvings on trees. Old symbols he didn't recognize. Once he found a dead animal, perfectly preserved, untouched by rot. Another time, he woke up with claw marks on his door, but no tracks in the snow. Then, one morning, a sound at the edge of his property. He stepped outside and froze. There, standing on the hill, was the cub. But it had grown. Too fast. Too large. Its eyes glowed yellow. It looked at him. Not with fear. Not with hunger. With recognition. Daniel took a step forward. And it turned, walking back into the forest, leaving behind only silence. But Daniel knew. This wasn't the end. Something had changed. Something ancient. And whatever it was, it had begun. Daniel didn't sleep that night. He sat on the wooden steps of his cabin, his rifle across his lap, staring into the tree line where the cub, no, that thing, had stood. The wind howled around him, whispering through the pine needles, like secrets in a language he almost understood. The memory of its glowing yellow eyes stayed with him like a brand. It wasn't just the unnatural growth that bothered him. It wasn't even the eyes or the silence that followed its every step. It was the look it gave him. That single moment of connection, where time seemed to slow and the air grew heavy, like the forest itself was holding its breath. There was a knowing in those eyes, something old, something that didn't belong in this world. It knew him, and that terrified Daniel more than anything else. Over the next few days, things got stranger. The animals in the forest stopped making noise. No bird sang. No squirrels scurried. Even the wind seemed to avoid his cabin now, brushing past it like it didn't want to disturb whatever force had nested nearby. Daniel tried to ignore it at first, convincing himself it was the cold playing tricks on his mind. But he couldn't ignore the signs. One morning, he woke up to find a ring of stones placed perfectly in a circle on his doorstep, each stone carved with the same symbol he'd seen on the tree deep in the forest. It was crude, ancient, and not something nature could have done on its own. He kicked the stones away, heart pounding, but that night they returned. Same shape, same position, as if untouched. Then came the dreams. At first, they were brief flashes. A dark forest lit by red lightning. A voice calling out from beneath the ground. The cub, larger, eyes brighter, standing on two legs and speaking in a language that had no sound but screamed inside his head. Then the dreams grew longer, more vivid. In one, he found himself walking through a stone city overrun by moss and rot. The walls bled when touched. The sky flickered between day and night with each step. And at the center of it all was a massive throne, and sitting upon it, the creature he had seen emerge from the arch. It smiled, but its mouth didn't move. Its eyes bore into him, filling his mind with fire and whispers. When he woke, his nose bled for hours, and he found symbols carved into his cabin walls, symbols he knew he hadn't drawn. He tried leaving, packed up what little he had, loaded it into his truck, and drove down the only road that led away from the forest. But after an hour, he found himself pulling back into his own yard, as if the road had looped or the forest had shifted around him. No matter how far he went, he always ended up back home, trapped. One night, about a week after he saw the cub again, Daniel heard something tapping on his window. It was slow, deliberate. Not the wind, not a branch. He grabbed his rifle and stepped into the cold night air. The snow was undisturbed, the trees still. But in the distance, maybe 50 feet away, stood a figure. Tall, thin, draped in what looked like fur, but not from any animal he'd ever seen. The figure didn't move, didn't breathe, just watched. Daniel raised the rifle, but couldn't bring himself to fire. The figure tilted its head, then slowly raised one hand and pointed to the forest. Then it vanished. Not walked away, vanished. Like smoke. Daniel was losing his mind. He knew it. But something deeper told him he wasn't. This was real. The forest was no longer just a forest. It was awake, and it wanted something. So he followed. The next morning, he gathered supplies, flashlight, compass, some food, a knife, and set out in the direction the figure had pointed. He didn't know what he was hoping to find. Maybe answers. Maybe death. But he couldn't stay still anymore. Not with the dreams growing worse, the forest creeping closer to his sanity. The snow was heavier that day, falling in sheets that muffled every sound. The world felt muted, like it was watching him quietly from behind every tree. After a few hours of walking, Daniel noticed the trees beginning to change. Their bark turned darker, smoother, almost like stone. The branches above him knitted together, blocking out the pale light of the sky. And then he saw it again. The arch. It stood exactly as it had before, moss-covered and ancient. But this time, there was no mistaking its power. The air around it shimmered, like heat rising off asphalt. Symbols carved into the stone glowed faintly, pulsing with a rhythm that felt like a heartbeat. His own heartbeat. Daniel stepped forward. The moment his foot crossed the threshold, the cold disappeared. The snow vanished, and he was somewhere else. The world on the other side was alive in a way that defied reason. Trees twice the size of skyscrapers loomed overhead, their trunks breathing in and out. The ground pulsed beneath his feet, soft and warm. In the distance, strange creatures moved slowly, their bodies glowing faintly, leaving trails of light behind them. The air tasted sweet and sharp at the same time, like biting into electricity. Daniel walked cautiously, feeling both terrified and exhilarated. Every step felt like he was trespassing on sacred ground. After what felt like hours, he came upon a lake. But the water wasn't water. It was like liquid glass, clear but reflective, rippling even without wind. On the surface stood the cub, fully grown now. Its form was bear-like, but wrong. Too tall, too thin. Its limbs moved with a grace that no bear should possess. And its eyes, they burned like stars. "You returned," it said, but not with its mouth. Daniel nodded, too numb to speak. "You touched the blood of the old ones," it continued. "You helped bring life into this world. That life now carries the mark. It must be protected." Daniel tried to find his voice. "What is this place?" The creature paused. "It is what was before. What still is beneath." "I don't understand," he said, his throat dry. "You will. In time." The lake shimmered, and suddenly Daniel saw images in its surface. The bear giving birth. The male bear attacking. The arch. But then the images changed. Flashes of cities buried beneath forests. Creatures slumbering beneath mountains. Ancient beings waking slowly, their eyes opening one by one. "Something is coming," the creature said. "Something that was sealed long ago." Daniel stared, trying to process it all. "Why me?" "Because you helped. Because you did not kill. Because you chose mercy." The lake grew still. Then the creature stepped off the surface and approached. "There will be others. Guardians. Enemies. You must choose who you will become." Before Daniel could respond, the creature touched his forehead with one clawed finger. A bolt of pain shot through him. He screamed, fell, and everything went dark. He woke up on the floor of his cabin. His clothes were soaked, mud on his boots, scratches on his arms. The symbols were gone from the walls. The ring of stones had vanished. Outside, the snow fell peacefully, as if nothing had happened. But something had. He moved to the mirror and gasped. There on his forehead, faint but glowing, the symbol from the arch. He was marked. And he knew. This was just the beginning. Whatever he had stepped into, whatever force had guided him, wasn't finished. The world he knew, the rules he lived by, the boundaries of what was real and what wasn't, had all been shattered. And something ancient had returned with him. It watched him now, not always seen, but always felt. The whisper in the wind, the shape in the fog, the voice in his dreams. The forest wasn't done with him. And deep below the roots, in the dark where no light reached, something stirred. Something that had waited for a very, very long time. It was awake now, and it was coming. The days that followed blurred into each other like oil on water. Daniel no longer trusted time. The clock ticked, but not in rhythm. Some days passed in minutes. Some minutes stretched into eternities. He tried to write down everything, hoping his thoughts would anchor him. Notes scrawled across old receipts, napkins, the backs of books. The markings on his forehead faded from glowing to faint scar-like lines, but they pulsed sometimes, especially at night. Especially when he was near the forest. His body had changed too, nothing drastic, not at first, but subtle things. His hearing became sharper, his sense of smell keener. He could hear the heartbeat of deer from yards away. When he walked barefoot in the woods, the soil felt different, like it was whispering beneath him, trying to say something in pulses and echoes. The boundary between him and the forest had grown thin, too thin. But it wasn't just him. The forest itself was changing. Trees that weren't there before appeared overnight, gnarled and blackened, leaves shaped like tongues and eyes. The birds that returned weren't quite right, feathers too shiny, songs that carried words you almost recognized. He once saw a doe walking calmly through his yard with 3 sets of legs and a mouth on its side. He blinked and it was gone. Normal again. Or maybe not. The only thing he knew for sure was that something was shifting under the skin of the world. The seams were splitting. One night, while chopping firewood, Daniel heard footsteps behind him. Slow, deliberate. He turned quickly, hand on his knife, but it wasn't a creature. It was a man. At least, That's what Daniel thought at first. The stranger was tall, unnaturally so, his coat long and tattered, edges frayed like something eaten from the inside out. His eyes were black, not from darkness, but from depth, bottomless, like holes punched into reality. He said nothing, just stared. And then he smiled. "You've seen it," the stranger said in a voice too smooth, like wind running over a blade. "The gate. The thing beneath. You've been marked." Daniel gripped the axe tighter. "Who are you?" The man tilted his head. "An observer. A herald. Depends on the day. What do you want?" "I want what you've already opened. You see, Daniel, when the bear screamed, something ancient heard. And when you helped, you became a door." Daniel stepped back instinctively. "You're crazy." "Oh, I'm not," the man said, his smile never fading. "Crazy is a luxury of those who don't know the truth. But you do now, don't you?" Before Daniel could answer, the man stepped forward. Not walked, stepped. As if one moment he was 10 feet away, and the next he was breathing against Daniel's cheek. His skin smelled of rot and rust. Daniel swung the axe, but it sliced through smoke. The man vanished in a burst of black feathers that dissolved midair. That night, Daniel didn't sleep. He couldn't. He stayed by the fire, watching shadows twist on the walls. Just before dawn, he heard a knock on the door. It wasn't polite. It wasn't frantic. It was patient. As though the thing on the other side had waited years, maybe centuries, and could wait a few minutes more. He opened the door, slowly. There was nothing. But on the ground sat a box. Small. Wooden. No lock. Inside was a tooth. Larger than any tooth he'd ever seen, longer than his hand, curved like a hook, etched with those same ancient runes he'd seen on the arch. It pulsed with heat. And beneath it was a note, handwritten in perfect cursive. "The heart of the forest remembers. You belong to it now. When the sky bleeds, you must return, or we will come for you." He burned the note. He buried the tooth. But it didn't matter. The next morning, the box was back. And this time, the tooth was missing. Instead, there was a feather. Long black. Slick with something warm. Daniel understood. Then. He wasn't dealing with just the cub or the arch. That had been the beginning. He had peeled back a veil, and now something was reaching through. And it wasn't just reaching for him. The following week, he ventured deeper into the woods than ever before, past the valley where the bear gave birth, past the trees with faces in the bark, and into a place that didn't appear on any map. A place the animals avoided, the wind hesitated to enter. The trees there weren't just old, they were wrong, twisting in spirals, reaching into the ground as if trying to climb back into the earth. He found stones standing in a circle, each one carved with a unique eye. Some were open, some closed. All of them seemed to follow him. At the center of the stone circle was a pool. Not water. Not quite. It reflected nothing. When he dropped a leaf into it, the leaf vanished. No splash, no ripple. Gone. He didn't dare touch it himself. Not yet. As he turned to leave, he heard a whisper. Not outside, but in his mind. A name. Arethel. It meant nothing to him. But it felt like it should. Over the next few days, that name followed him. In his dreams. In the way the trees rustled. In the creaking of the wood in his cabin. Something was calling him by that name. And something else was looking for that name. He began to suspect that the cub, no, the creature that had emerged from the bear, was not the only one awakened by the gate. That thing had come into the world as a guardian. But something else had slipped through as well. Something that shouldn't have. The air changed again. A storm gathered, slow, unnatural. Thunder that sounded more like growls. Lightning without clouds. And then, one evening, the sky did exactly what the note had warned. It bled. The sunset turned crimson. Not the warm orange of dusk, but deep, arterial red. It soaked the clouds. It dripped from the horizon. And when Daniel looked up, he saw a rift forming, thin at first, like a scratch in glass, then widening slowly, revealing a darkness behind the sky. Not space. Not stars. Just nothing. A void. And something moved in it. He grabbed his bag, his flashlight, his weapons, and ran. He knew where he had to go. back to the arch, back to the place where it all began. The forest seemed to recognize him now. The trees bent slightly to allow him through. The air thickened with every step. When he reached the arch, he didn't hesitate. He stepped through and found that the other side had changed. It was no longer quiet. It roared with sound, voices, screams, hymns in dead languages. The sky above this world was cracked open, revealing machinery or bones, or both. He couldn't tell. The grown cub stood there again, waiting. "You've returned," it said, though its mouth didn't move. "The sky is bleeding," Daniel said, breathless. The creature nodded. "The wound is open. He is waking." "Who?" The creature looked past him, into the distance. "The one who was buried. The one we were made to guard against. The one you've heard in your dreams." "Arethel," Daniel whispered. The creature's eyes flared. "That is your name now. It was his. And now it is yours." Daniel stepped back. "What are you saying? You were chosen before you were born. This has happened before." The door opens. The sleeper stirs. A bearer of mercy stands at the center. "No," Daniel said, shaking his head. "I didn't choose this. But you did. When you saved life. When you gave compassion. The gate recognized you. The forest bound you. Now you must decide." "Decide what?" The creature turned toward the lake of glass, which now boiled with dark shapes moving beneath it. "Decide whether to seal him again, or to set him free." Daniel stared into the water and saw himself, not as he was, but as he could become, cloaked in shadow, eyes glowing, a king of the forgotten world, or a guardian wrapped in light, fighting a war against time itself. He looked back at the creature. "And if I do nothing?" The lake cracked, the sky above shattered, and the creature said, "Then the world becomes his cage, and your people his playthings." Daniel closed his eyes, took a breath, and stepped forward. He didn't know what power flowed through his veins now, or what ancient spirit had stitched itself into his soul, but he felt it rising inside him, like fire, like memory, like destiny. And as the world beneath him screamed, and the void beyond cracked wide enough to swallow hope itself, Daniel opened his eyes and spoke a word that hadn't been heard in 10,000 years. The earth trembled. The lake split open, and far beneath it, something answered. This wasn't the end. It was the beginning of the real story. And Daniel, no longer just a man, was about to write it in blood and flame.